Forget the Hollywood movies. Forget the anime swordsman shouting attack names. And forget the gray-bearded wizard you might have seen in pop culture. The real Hattori Hanzo was not a caricature. He was a walking nightmare in an era where nightmares were a daily reality. History remembers him as a paradox, a man who existed in the twilight between the rigid, honorable code of the samurai and the dirty, blood-soaked espionage of the ninja. He was a ghost who could command armies, a demon who could show mercy, and a shadow that changed the course of Japanese history forever. But to understand the demon, you have to understand the hell he was born into. We are not talking about a civilized time. We are talking about the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Imagine a Japan that is burning. For over a century, the social order had collapsed into a chaotic free-for-all, where betrayal was the only currency that held value. Brothers murdered brothers for scraps of land, and fathers sent sons to die for the glory of clans that would be extinct within a decade. It was a meat grinder of human ambition, and in the year 1542, in the Mikawa province, a child named Masanori was born into this world of ash and iron. He would later take the name Hanzo, inheriting it from his father, Hattori Yasunaga, a minor samurai serving the Matsudaira clan. But simply being born a samurai in the 16th century was not a ticket to power. It was often a death sentence. The Matsudaira were surrounded by enemies, a small fish in a tank full of sharks, and young Hanzo was raised with the knowledge that his life belonged entirely to his lord. Most children learn to walk, and then they learn to play. But the legends surrounding Hanzo suggest a childhood stripped of innocence and replaced with a brutal, single-minded discipline that borders on child abuse by modern standards. Sources suggest that his training began as early as the age of 8. Picture a boy, barely tall enough to draw a katana from its sheath without dragging the tip in the dirt, being sent up into the mountains. This wasn't just physical conditioning. This was the breaking of the human spirit to forge a weapon. The mountains of Japan are unforgiving places, shrouded in mist and silence. And it is here that the lines between history and folklore begin to blur. It is said he sought out ancient teachers, hermits, and mystics who dwelled in the high peaks, men who practiced the esoteric arts that would eventually coalesce into what we know as ninjutsu. While we cannot verify every meeting with a mountain mystic, we can verify the result. The boy who came down from that mountain was different. He possessed a focus that was terrifying to behold in one so young. He wasn't just learning how to swing a sword, he was learning how to disappear. He was learning how to read the wind, how to listen to the silence, and how to kill without hesitation. This dual education is critical to understanding the monster he would become. On one hand, he was trained as a samurai, drilled in the open warfare tactics of cavalry charges, spearmanship, and honorable duels. On the other hand, his heritage linked him to the Iga province, the spiritual home of the ninja, where warfare was not about honor, but about survival at any cost. By the time he was a teenager, Hanzo was already making a name for himself on the battlefield. But it wasn't a name that inspired hope. It inspired dread. His military strategy was described as fearless, but that word feels too clean. It was ferocious. It was predatory. When Hanzo entered a skirmish, he didn't just fight to win. He fought to dismantle the enemy psychologically. He moved with a speed and aggression that seemed unnatural, cutting through lines of infantry with a precision that made seasoned veterans pause in horror. This is where the moniker Oni no Hanzo, or Demon Hanzo, was born. It wasn't just a cool nickname, it was a warning. In Japanese folklore, an Oni is a creature of immense power and malevolence, an ogre that cannot be stopped by mortal means. To call a human being an Oni was to suggest that he had shed his humanity somewhere along the way. And looking at his early career, it is easy to see why. He threw himself into the chaotic, bloody mosh pits of feudal combat with a zeal that unsettled even his allies. But underneath the bloodlust was a cold, calculating intellect. He wasn't a berserker. He was a surgeon of war. He understood that a battle wasn't won by the number of bodies you piled up, but by breaking the enemy's will to fight. And nothing broke the enemy's will faster than the sight of the demon Hanzo carving a path toward their commander. But the true test of the demon was yet to come. The Matsudaira clan, whom Hanzo served, was evolving. Their young lord, a man who would eventually be known as Tokugawa Ieyasu, was rising from the ashes of obscurity to become a major player in the unification of Japan. But in the 1560s, Ieyasu was still vulnerable, surrounded by the towering giants of the era like Oda Nobunaga. The political landscape was a minefield, and one wrong step meant the extinction of the entire clan. It was in this high-stakes environment that Hanzo's unique skill set would be unlocked. He was about to be asked to do the impossible. The era of the samurai was rigid, obsessed with face-to-face combat and declared challenges. But Ieyasu realized that to survive, he needed something more. He needed someone who could operate in the dark. He needed someone who could walk through walls. And so the young warlord looked at his demon, this 19-year-old prodigy of violence, and gave him a mission that would require him to shed his samurai armor and embrace the shadow of his Iga ancestors. This was the moment a legend truly began, the moment Masanori died and the Master of Shadows took his place. The target was Kaminogo Castle. The objective was suicide. And the demon Hanzo didn't even blink. The year was 1562, and the night hung heavy over Kaminogo Castle like a suffocating shroud. This was not a battlefield where armies marched in neat rows under fluttering banners. This was a black operation, a suicide mission designed for men who did not expect to see the sunrise. The objective was stark and personal. The daughters of Tokugawa Ieyasu had been captured by the rival Udono clan, held as leverage to strangle the future shogun's ambitions before they could truly begin. A conventional siege would have taken weeks and likely resulted in the execution of the hostages. So Ieyasu turned to the 16-year-old boy they called the Demon. While most samurai of his rank were obsessing over the color of their armor lacing or the poetry of their death, Hanzo was stripping away the heavy plating of tradition. He understood that honor was a luxury the dead could not afford. Leading a unit of men who moved less like soldiers and more like vapor, Hanzo initiated a master class in guerrilla warfare. He didn't just storm the gates, he dissolved into the environment. Accounts describe him merging with the castle guards, a terrifying implication that suggests he wore their faces or simply moved with such unnatural confidence that the enemy believed he belonged there until the knife was already in their throat. He attacked from above, dropping from the rafters and walls like a spider descending on a fly, turning the sanctuary of the castle into a slaughterhouse of confusion. The psychological impact was devastating. The enemy defenders weren't fighting a man, they were fighting the shadows in the corner of their eyes. By the time the sun crested the horizon, the castle had fallen, the hostages were secured, and the legend of the ninja commander was cemented in blood. This success changed everything. Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man known for his patience and foresight, saw the terrifying utility of Hanzo's methods. He realized that while samurai could win battles, ninjas could win wars. So impressed was the Lord with this teenage prodigy that he began to aggressively employ more shinobi from the Iga province, placing them all under the direct stewardship of Hanzo. The young samurai Masanori was effectively dead. In his place stood the master of the Iga, the head of a secret police force that would become the eyes and ears of the Tokugawa Shogunate. But if Kaminogo proved his skill, the tragedy of Nobuyasu would prove his soul. We often think of these ancient warriors as emotionless killing machines, stoic statues who obeyed orders with robotic precision. But the story of Hanzo takes a heartbreaking detour into the complexities of human loyalty. Several years later, the political landscape had shifted into a nightmare scenario. Oda Nobunaga, the terrifying unifier of Japan and technically an ally of Tokugawa, had grown paranoid. He accused Ieyasu's eldest son, Nobuyasu, of treason and conspiracy. In the brutal calculus of the Sengoku period, there was no trial, no jury, and no defense. Nobunaga demanded the boy's head. Ieyasu, backed into a corner and unable to fight the overpowering might of the Oda clan, was forced to order his own son to commit seppuku. This ritual suicide is gruesome. The samurai slices open his own abdomen to release his spirit, but the agony is unbearable. To show mercy, a second, known as a kaishakunin, stands behind him with a sword to decapitate the victim the moment the pain becomes too great. This role requires a steady hand and nerves of steel. Ieyasu looked to his most lethal killer, the demon Hanzo, and ordered him to stand behind his son and deliver the mercy blow. Picture the scene: the gravel courtyard, the white robes of the condemned prince, the smell of incense mixing with the metallic tang of fear. Hanzo stood there, his katana drawn, the edge glimmering in the sunlight. This was a direct order from his lord. To disobey was unthinkable. To disobey was treason. But as Hanzo looked down at the neck of the young man, a man who carried the blood of the lord he worshipped, the demon froze. The silence in that courtyard must have been deafening. For the first time in his life, the perfect weapon malfunctioned. Hanzo fell to his knees, weeping. He refused the order. He looked at his master and effectively said that while he could kill 1,000 enemies, while he could storm castles and slit throats in the dark, he could not raise his blade against the flesh and blood of Tokugawa Ieyasu. He famously declared that he could not kill a man who shared the same blood as his great lord. It was a moment of shocking insubordination that should have resulted in his execution. But it didn't. Instead, it broke the tension and revealed the profound humanity buried under the layers of the demon's reputation. It is said that Ieyasu was so moved by this display of loyalty, a loyalty so deep it superseded a direct command, that he spared Hanzo and wept alongside him. This moment spawned the famous saying regarding Hanzo, "Even a demon has a heart." It cemented a bond between the warlord and the ninja, that went far beyond the transaction of money and service. Hanzo was no longer just a tool. He was the conscience of the Tokugawa clan, a man who guarded not just the physical body of the shogun, but the spiritual integrity of the family. But as touching as this moment was, the fires of war were still burning, and the greatest crisis of their lives was fast approaching. The demon had shown his heart, but very soon he would need to show his teeth again, because the unifier Oda Nobunaga was about to die, and Japan was about to plunge into a free fall that would leave Ieyasu stranded in enemy territory with nothing but a handful of men and the wit of his ninja master to save him. The turning point of Japanese history arrived not with a shout, but with the smell of smoke in June 1582. Oda Nobunaga, the ruthless unifier who had dragged Japan out of the Dark Ages by the throat, was betrayed by one of his own generals at the Honnoji Temple. Forced to commit seppuku while his temple burned around him, his death shattered the fragile peace of the nation in an instant. For Tokugawa Ieyasu, this was the ultimate catastrophe. He was far from the safety of his home province of Mikawa, stranded in a hostile land that was suddenly swarming with enemies looking to claim the head of Nobunaga's greatest ally. The roads were blocked, the towns were closing their gates, and headhunters were sharpening their blades. Ieyasu was effectively a walking corpse. He had a small retinue, limited supplies, and hundreds of miles of treacherous terrain between him and salvation. It was a logistical nightmare that should have ended the Tokugawa lineage right there. But Ieyasu had an ace up his sleeve. He had the demon. Hanzo looked at the map and realized there was only one way home. They had to cross the Iga province. This was suicide for a normal samurai. Iga was a lawless, mountainous region, a labyrinth of jagged peaks and dense forests that served as the breeding ground for the country's most dangerous ninja clans. But for Hanzo, this wasn't enemy territory. This was home. This journey, known to history as the Iga Crossing, is the stuff of legend. It was here that Hanzo's duality as both a samurai commander and a ninja chieftain was pushed to its absolute limit. He didn't just guide his master, he weaponized the landscape. Because of his heritage, Hanzo had deep ancestral ties with the local ninja clans of the region. He moved ahead of the main party, utilizing a network of secret signals and old alliances to turn potential enemies into an elite escort. Imagine the scene. Tired, terrified samurai marching through a narrow mountain pass, jumping at every shadow, while Hanzo moves with an eerie calm, negotiating passage with men who killed for a living. When diplomacy failed, violence was the only language left, and accounts describe Hanzo and his ninja bodies making quick work of any resistance. They engaged enemies along the road, not in honorable duels, but with the terrifying efficiency of a pack of wolves. They struck from the tree line, from the cliff edges, and from the tall grass, clearing a path of blood for the future shogun to walk upon. It is from this frantic 5-day trek of walking and battling that the most supernatural myths about Hanzo originate. The witnesses who saw him fight during this crossing didn't have the vocabulary to explain what they were seeing. How could a man accept a sword strike and seemingly vanish, only to reappear behind his attacker? How could he anticipate an ambush before the enemy had even drawn their breath? History books were filled with whispers of teleportation, psychokinesis, and precognition. They said he could read minds and move objects with his will. But the truth is likely far more terrifying than the magic. Hanzo wasn't teleporting. He was using the secret teachings of ninjutsu, arts like stealth, camouflage, and psychological deception to manipulate the battlefield. He moved faster than the samurai eye could track, utilized flash powders or smoke, and exploited the blind spots of the human mind. To the uninitiated, high-level competence looks like sorcery. The teleportation was likely a mastery of footwork and distraction. The precognition was a hyper-awareness of micro-expressions and environmental cues. He wasn't a wizard. He was a master of the spotlight, keeping his true abilities shrouded in shadow and secrecy, so that no one, not even his allies, knew the full extent of his lethality. Against all odds, after 5 days of hell, the group arrived safely in Mikawa. The demon had delivered his master from the jaws of death. This specific act of service changed the trajectory of the nation. Had Ieyasu died in those mountains, the 300-year reign of the Tokugawa Shogunate would never have happened. The peace of the Edo period, the culture of the samurai, the very identity of modern Japan, it was all carried on the back of Hattori Hanzo through the forests of Iga. Ieyasu threw his support behind Toyotomi Hideyoshi to finish the unification work, and when the dust finally settled and Tokugawa assumed the title of Shogun in 1590, he did not forget the man who saved him. He moved his capital to Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and he gave Hanzo a position of supreme trust. But Ieyasu was still a paranoid man, suspicious of betrayal and ambush even in his own castle. So he took the ninjas who had served him so well in the mountains and placed them under Hanzo's full stewardship, ordering them to take up barracks at the rear of Edo Castle. They became the secret guardians of the realm. The gate they watched over is still there today. It is called the Hanzomon Gate, a permanent scar on the geography of Tokyo, named after the demon who stood watch, ensuring that while the city slept, the shadows were on their side. In the years following the unification, Hanzo entered a phase of existence that few warriors of his kind ever lived to see: peace. With the Tokugawa clan firmly established in Edo, the man who had spent his life in the mud and blood of the Sengoku civil wars was rewarded with a fortune that defied comprehension. The demon was given an estate and an income so vast that it rivaled the earnings of high-ranking daimyos. This is a jarring image to reconcile with our pop culture idea of a ninja. We imagine them living in caves or hidden villages, scraping by on rice and discipline. But Hanzo lived in the lap of luxury. He had successfully monetized the shadows, yet he never fully sheathed his blade. The western gate of Edo Castle, the Hanzomon, became his permanent post. Inside the barracks, he kept his private army of Iga ninjas in a state of perpetual readiness. They were the invisible wall between the shogun and the world, a terrifying deterrent that whispered to any would-be assassin that to get to the king, you had to go through the demon. For a brief window of time, Hanzo stood at the pinnacle of the world, a master of war, a wealthy lord, and the trusted right hand of the most powerful man in Japan. But the tragedy of a warrior is that he can conquer armies, but he cannot conquer time. In 1596, at the age of 54, Hattori Hanzo died. The cause of his death is often debated. Some say illness, Others whisper of a final, unrecorded battle. But the impact of his death was immediate and catastrophic. The transcript notes a chilling detail. His band of ninjas was said to die with him. This was not a mass suicide or a ritual sacrifice. It was a spiritual disintegration. Without the terrifying gravity of Hanzo's presence, the discipline of the Iga unit collapsed. The rigorous training slackened. The razor-sharp edge of their skills dulled, and the cohesiveness of the group fractured. It proved that Hanzo was not just a commander. He was the force of nature that held the chaos of the ninja world in check. His remains were interred at a temple in Tokyo, surrounded by his favorite weapons, a silent arsenal buried with a master who could no longer wield them. The demon was gone, and he had taken the magic of the era with him. The legacy of the Hattori name attempted to live on through his bloodline, but this chapter of the story serves as a brutal lesson on the nature of greatness. Hanzo's first son, also named Masanori, tried to fill the void left by his father. He was appointed captain of the castle guard by order of Tokugawa Ieyasu himself, a desperate attempt by the shogun to keep the magic alive. But Masanori was not the demon. He inherited the name, but not the spirit. History remembers him as arrogant and undisciplined. He treated the Iga ninjas not as brothers in arms, but as servants, racking up debts and failing to earn their respect. The situation deteriorated so badly that the very guards sworn to protect the shogunate rebelled against their new captain. Humiliated and relieved of his duties, Masanori died a tragic, desperate death in battle, throwing his life away in a frantic attempt to redeem the honor he had squandered. Another son, Masashige, fared slightly better, serving the Tokugawa clan with some distinction. But even he could not grasp the esoteric teachings of ninjutsu that his father had mastered. The lineage continued, but the flame had gone out. The demon was a singularity, a biological and psychological anomaly that could not be replicated. Ultimately, the most fascinating aspect of Hattori Hanzo's life is the silence he left behind. Because of the very nature of his profession, the vast majority of his life is a blank page. We know about the rescue of the daughters, the suicide order he refused, and the Iga Crossing. But these are just the moments that were public enough to be written down. Hanzo served Ieyasu for decades. There are years of unaccounted time where he was undoubtedly active. Logic dictates that there could have been hundreds of epic missions, assassinations, thefts, psychological warfare campaigns, and acts of sabotage that were executed so perfectly that history never noticed they happened. We are left with a ghost story, a silhouette of a man who shaped the destiny of a nation from the shadows. Was he a wizard with supernatural powers? Probably not. He was likely something far more dangerous, a man of supreme focus and adaptability, who mastered the art of doing what others deemed impossible. He was the demon who had a heart, the samurai who became a ninja, and the shadow that allowed the sun of the Tokugawa Shogunate to rise. We spend this entire story marveling at the demon, the killer, the weapon. But here is the haunting irony. Hattori Hanzo's greatest contribution to history wasn't an act of killing. It was an act of running. The Iga Crossing was essentially an escape mission. He saved the future of Japan not by slaying a dragon, but by guiding a terrified man through the woods. We fetishize the sword, but it was his compass and his diplomacy that built the shogunate. The demon was actually the ultimate preserver of life. It forces us to ask, do we misunderstand strength? Is true power the ability to destroy, or is it the ability to navigate the chaos and bring someone home alive? Think about the sons of Hanzo. We look at them with pity, but they represent a very modern struggle, the crushing weight of expectation. How many of us are paralyzed because we are trying to live up to a legend, a successful parent, a brilliant mentor, or even an idealized version of ourselves? Masanori died because he was trying to be his father instead of himself. It's a brutal reminder that trying to wear someone else's armor will only slow you down on the battlefield. You cannot inherit greatness. You have to forge your own, even if it looks different from those who came before you. So here is the question that decides your fate. If you were in that courtyard, standing behind the man you were sworn to obey, holding the sword to his son's neck, do you choose the path of the loyal soldier and follow orders to maintain the system? Or do you choose the path of the human demon and break the code to save your soul? Hanzo was the shadow, but every shadow is cast by a light. And in this era, the brightest, hottest, and most destructive fire was the man Hanzo's master served and feared. A man who didn't care about shadows or stealth, but burned everything in his path to unify the nation. Next time, we walk into the fire with the Demon King himself. Subscribe to survive the reign of Oda Nobunaga.